Okay, so is there a concept of time? So just to convey this first, those kinds of idioms are not in the Jewish scriptures. The Jewish scripture just uses the divine idioms. This is the way we talk, and it's really became really important about time and timelessness and so on, especially after Einstein upended Newtonian physics less than a century ago, about 100 years ago. So the prophets speak in the following way, that God is outside of time. Isaiah 57 verse 15, that God is raised up, he's Ram Venisa, he's great and raised up, Shechen Ad, and he is above all things. He is the Kodesh, he's utterly holy. So remember, before the universe was created by God, there was nothing. God brought the universe into existence. Think about this. What did God create first as we look at the book of Genesis? What's the first thing he created? Light. Light's the first thing. Now, what is very strange about that is that God didn't create the sun until the fourth day. The sun and the moon, the celestial bodies, were created on day 4. But there was some reason that God had to have light immediately. We know now why, because light and time are bound together. So as such, God is not bound by his own creation. God does not exist within the limits of his own creation. And that's really expressed further in creation. And that's the seventh day. When we come to the Sabbath, whereas the first 6 days it was evening and it was morning, it was the first day, Vayher, Vayivoker. The Sabbath, the seventh day, which is sanctified by God, we don't have the words, it was evening, it was morning. It doesn't exist at the end of Genesis 1 or the beginning of Genesis 2. Why? Because what Shabbat is, the Sabbath is an eternal day. It's a divine day. And those who observe the Shabbat are entering into the eternal day with God, as we are on this earth. So God is outside the boundaries of nature. He intervenes in nature, and he allows those who want to taste his world. We can't see God's face and live. Whatever that means, we can't enter there. But we want to have some sense of what that otherness is, that timelessness is. Where there is no evening and morning, I'll give you Shabbat. You can enter there and connect to me while you're on this world. So that's difficult because I lived in Indonesia for quite a number of years, and the people living in Malaysia know better than I do that Indonesian and Malaysian are very, very similar languages. In fact, any Indonesian could understand Malay. It would be no-brainer. So, but as it turns out, Hebrew and English are not just different. It's a different world, and therefore the idioms are completely different. The Semitic languages are all based on a root system, and ôlâm really conveys the universe. In fact, it's the same word. And therefore, we would like words to be fixed into the English language, but it turns out the Hebrew language is much older. And ôlâm means the world. And therefore, ôlâm means as the world stands. And you have to therefore look at the context. If the context is ôlâm, and there will never be a time without it, so then you know from that context what that means. When Hannah prayed to God in Samuel 1 Samuel chapter 2 and asks for the blessing of a child, she said that she will dedicate that child forever to his work, meaning to be in the tabernacle. She knew her child would not live forever, of course, but what she meant is for his entire life. So you very carefully, you have to always look at the context of what is being conveyed. The Torah, observance of the mitzvot. So of course the text tells us that the keeping of the Torah is forever and ever, and it will never depart, never. The Torah will never depart from your mouth, never. Isaiah 59, verse 20, 21. Never. There will be no time without the Shabbat, no time of the holidays. And we can see that in context in all the Messianic prophecy. So it's true. Now, usually the word ôlâm usually would mean forever. But we would always seek out the context to see if it's taking us in a different direction. So, the English translators were ripping their hair out. Like, how do we render these things? So they actually came up with idioms like forever and ever, like what do you need and ever for? Well, the ever and ever conveys perhaps that there's no ending to it. So as it turns out, let's take the covenant that God made with Israel as an example. So we know very well that that's eternal. It can never be broken. Not only by the words, but also we're reminded that in the Torah that God will never uproot that, never. No matter what mistakes the children of Israel will make, God will never utterly destroy them. See the end of Leviticus 26, starting from verse 44. Jeremiah says, listen carefully. Look at the sky. You see the sun? If it's at night, look, do you see the moon and the stars? If these laws will depart from me, so too will I cast off the seed of Jacob for being a nation. It can never happen. So the prophets were very careful to also convey this. And don't even think for a moment that God's covenant with the children of Israel could ever be abrogated. You talk about the covenant of circumcision. It's interesting. We have messianic prophecy about the third temple, explicit. Ezekiel 44, verse 9. Tell us in the final temple, the third temple, that no one who is uncircumcised, both of the heart and the flesh, will be able to enter the sanctuary. And that's, I don't know if your viewers fully grasp the full scope of what I just said. In Indonesia, they took soccer, football, whatever they call it, very seriously. And I'm sure it's the same thing in Malaysia. And before a very big soccer game, there'd be enormous discussion about which team do you think is going to win the game. I remember that big soccer match that happens once in 4 years. People go nuts trying to figure out which team is more likely to win. And people formed all kinds of opinions. This team has a better defense. This team has a better striker. But once the game occurred and it was resolved and one team won, so then the discussion would change completely to, well, how did that happen? But no one's going to try to figure out what's going to happen because it happened already. We have the videotape. We've seen the game with our own eyes. So that's what you find in the prophets. In Ezekiel, we have the videotape of what is going to happen. It's immutable. So therefore, the discussion has to shift from what do you think would happen to, well, this is what's going to happen. In this instance, as an example, the sanctuary, the temple in Jerusalem, will be a place that only those who are circumcised of the flesh and heart will enter. So we know that this is an eternal covenant between man and God. If, incidentally, in almost all cases, when the word ôlâm is not conveying eternity, there would be something in the text that would convey that. We would find something in the text that would show us that this word, which normally is conveying eternity, as we would conventionally say, does not mean eternity in this sense. The root there goes back to the word ôlâm, which means the world, the universe. So we would always look for something intervening in the text to tell us, well, this is why it could mean that, or in some cases, it's obvious it could mean that in a superficial way.